I'd like to welcome everybody and call our meeting to order for the Planning Commission meeting tonight. I'd like to take this time to introduce our Planning Commission members. At my far right, I have Shelley Nazer. To my left, to my right, my other right, is Bob Hinkie. Welcome. To my left is Tyler Riggs. Next to him is Bob Washburn and Joe Chambers on the end.
Far left.
Far
But by no means politically.
I'm glad you
No
clarified that.
implications for political leanings.
No affiliations there. That's great. So thank you very much. I would like to acknowledge that Vice Chair Brian Marble is absent for personal reasons and will not be attending or participating via Zoom tonight. Excuse him, wish him the best. We will now have our pledge for allegiance, and I invite everyone to stand and join in with us as Bob Hinkie will lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, indivisible.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. What we need to do at this time is to review our minutes from our last meeting. I hope everybody's had a chance to and take a look and see if we're ready to approve those or if there's any changes or corrections that we think is needed.
Have one minor change, line 235, change Brian Mabel to Brian Marble.
I hope you have one of those pens, Ty, where it'll just take notes for you. That'd be so nice. I have one other change, 150. I hope this isn't narcissistic, but if you could just spell my name correctly. And also CCNRs should be like the and sign, not the letter N.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Looks good.
Shally would be a cool name.
Yeah.
On line 168, I think Norman Gillespie is probably Norman.
It's good. Anything else, Bob?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. If we don't have anybody that has any other comments or corrections as they reviewed it, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from August 9th.
I have a motion by Shelley Nazer to approve the minutes. Have a second?
I'll make a second, but I'm gonna abstain from voting since I wasn't at the meeting and don't know what occurred.
Do we need to
Okay.
include
with
the
amendment.
alterations, the corrections?
Subject. Yeah.
Subject
Subject to the
corrections.
corrections? Yes. Would you mind stating that just one
Sure,
more time?
yes.
So we're,
I will make a motion that we approve the minutes subject to the recommendations from the August 9th, 2023.
thank you. We have that motion by Shelley Nazer. We have a second by Joe Chambers. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Okay. Let me get back. At this time, is an opportunity for public comments. So Tyler, did we have anybody write in, call in, Zoom in?
I checked 5 minutes, right on in.
Yeah, nothing's fine. Okay. I know, Maddie, that you're here for us, but so the public comment period is just for general comments to be made. So if you're all, unless you have something you'd like to say, we'll wait, move on.
Sure. yeah.
Okay, perfect. If there is nothing, then we will go ahead and close the public comment portion of the meeting. And we will move to our public hearing presentations. Tonight, we had the pleasure of having Maddie from CAPSA present to us and give us an update on things and share some information. So we welcome you here to the Planning Commission meeting and turn the time over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Maddie Soto. I work at CAPSA in the Community Engagement Department. And it's really my job just to kind of make sure that people in our service area know who we are, what we do, and how you can kind of interact with us. I usually do visit city councils in October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and then April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. But I've never done a planning commission before, so thanks for having me. I just have a quick message to share from CAPSA about it being Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October. At CAPSA, we acknowledge the vital role that each of you plays in shaping our community at large. On behalf of all of our staff at CAPSA and in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we are grateful for this opportunity to share valuable information and shed light on the support offered to survivors of domestic violence. Domestic violence is a pervasive issue that affects individuals across all walks of life, regardless of age, gender, or socioeconomic background. Last year, CAPSA supported 327 individuals through our emergency shelter, 7,062 through our crisis line, which comes out to an average of 19 calls per day, and 1,558 individuals through outreach casework. These numbers highlight the urgency of addressing this issue and supporting those affected by it. At CAPSA, our mission is to provide comprehensive services to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as education and prevention efforts to the broader community. We firmly believe in the power of collective action and community support in creating a safe and nurturing environment for all. Our organization offers a range of vital services, and today we wish to highlight our shelter services. Our emergency shelter at CAPSA has 34 beds for individuals fleeing domestic and sexual violence. While in shelter, individuals can work with a team of caseworkers to help remove barriers and connect to therapy for crisis intervention. Children in our shelter are also especially considered. Monday through Thursday, our youth advocacy team provides activities and lessons for youth in our shelter. We are so grateful to each member of your commission. I have council written here, but you know. Your commitment to addressing domestic violence and supporting organizations like CAPSA has made a significant difference in the lives of countless survivors. Together, we are building a community that refuses to tolerate violence and stands in solidarity with those affected. In observance of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we encourage all community members and leaders to take an active role in ending domestic violence and supporting survivors. This can be done through volunteering and donating, but also through education, awareness, and advocating for change. I know that we can't do the work we do in our community without community members and leaders such as yourselves. So I thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to me today. And I have a poster and some ribbons for use however you think works best. Do you have?
Now,
something?
the poster is something we would put up downstairs or something like that, I
Yeah,
believe. And the ribbons,
ribbons, you can do whatever you
Okay.
want with, distribute, wear, whatever you like.
well, thank you very much,
Yeah.
and thank you for the message.
Thank
I'd
you.
ask that you not leave too quickly here.
Okay, sure.
We had a few questions. and
Absolutely.
I
ask
do,
away.
and maybe others as well. I'm curious with everything that's happened. I also have the opportunity and honor to serve on one of the BRAG boards, the Human Services Board. So we work with CAPSA
Yeah,
and involved in a CAPSA representative
that's great.
is there as well on the board. But I'm curious with everything that's happened over the last couple of years. We saw spikes in a lot of things
Yeah.
because people not being able to work,
Sure.
issues, renting and their housing and just all kinds of issues bombarded individuals. And we saw a major increase. What is it like now? Has the numbers started to come down?
I do believe that the numbers have started to come down a little bit. I don't want to quote and say something totally wrong and
Yeah.
but I do think so. During COVID, yeah, we did see a spike in numbers, absolutely, and they have come down a little bit since then.
Yeah.
But we do know that also as our services increase, we also are increasing numbers of survivors that we're helping as well. So it
Right.
kind of just depends on what's going on that year, how our marketing is doing, how much people are knowing that we are a service for them. So
Right.
that's why we do things like this. So,
Also, Is there anything, are there any major needs at CAPS at this time, or unique or special needs?
I did just hear a caseworker say that she has a large family that she's serving that's in need of winter coats coming up here soon. So that is something that we need, like warm clothing and winter coats and stuff when that season comes around.
Yeah.
But besides that, we're always looking for things like paper products, hygiene items, really just everyday items that sometimes you don't even think about. Because oftentimes survivors come with really nothing but the clothes on their backs. And we need to give them as many everyday items as we can, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other question I had is, tell us about your limits, or space. Do we have more than enough units for servicing everyone? Are we having, I know that there are multiple units where people are housed and so forth
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Are you at capacity? Do we have
So,
people?
Yeah, we have 34 beds in our shelter
Right,
and we are oftentimes full.
Yeah.
Almost always we're
Yeah.
full. And because of that, we work with local hotels to get them in at discounted rates provided for by fundraising efforts. So yeah, we are always in need of shelter still, even with our transitional housing program, which is for people who sort of graduate, for lack of a better
Right.
term, from shelter into transitional
different
housing.
housing.
We have that as well, but for shelter needs, we do just have the 34 beds and then hotels.
So in an emergency situation, if there was no space at the shelter, it would go to one of the local hotels that
Correct.
participate. Of the numbers in the shelter, how many children are there? Is it individuals? Is it predominantly, a spouse and children?
Usually it'll be children who are accompanying their parents.
Right,
Because things get a little bit tricky with minors
Right.
sometimes. So most of the time, it's children accompanying their parent.
is that the majority that's in the shelter?
I would say so. I know 13 of our clients last year were male. The rest is women and their children.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Thank you very much.
yeah, thank
Is
you.
there anyone else on the council that would have?
What's the average length of stay at the shelter?
That's a great question. So I would say our survivors stay for an average of 30 days and then when they go into transitional housing, it's an average of 2 years. So.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So, I'm on the board with Little Lambs Foundation for
Cool.
Kids. I think we worked together
Yeah.
a little bit to help provide some of those emergency
Yeah.
necessities. We are struggling with space also for volunteers.
Mm.
And so I'm curious, especially here in Providence, there are so many people and they come to me all the time just asking, how can I help?
Yeah.
What can I do to volunteer? So what are some of the options? I know how sensitive the domestic violence is and, we don't even like to publish where the shelters are and
Yeah,
we want to
sure.
keep everybody safe. So
Yeah.
what are some of the opportunities you have where people can come and help?
Yeah, so CAPS actually has a really awesome volunteer program and we rely on volunteers for a lot of the work that we do. So we're actually in between volunteer coordinators right now, but our assistant volunteer coordinator is Miranda, spelled with a Y, so it's like Myranda at capsa.org. If you want to send her a message, she can tell you all of the different opportunities. When we send out sign-up sheets for volunteers, we have so many opportunities that we have an area that says area of interest or expertise, because we can kind of do whatever's interesting to you. We have people who help in our daycare. We have people who work in our donation center, sorting and cleaning and that type of thing. We often need help in our shelter, doing emergency check-ins or just help around the shelter. We have events that we always need help with, sometimes sitting at booths. Really, the opportunities are lots. So I would advise calling or emailing to ask.
Do you take used items or do you only take new ones?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the item. Like a shampoo, we would want new, but clothing, we can do used clothing and stuff like that. We also have a partnership with Somebody's Attic where they donate their proceeds to us. And our survivors also get vouchers to shop there as well. So I always encourage people to donate to Somebody's Attic.
Yes, I agree. Great. I am also wondering, if you, there's a big push right now, in the legislature, and we're working on teen centers.
Yeah.
I know there's a new one in Logan. Do you have a program specifically for teens, who are
Yeah.
struggling or need assistance?
Yeah, so one of our departments is our prevention education program. And they spend a lot of time going to schools and providing education and like after school programs and stuff like that. And one of our programs is our youth council. And they come in and they're kind of like a board, but they're like our teen board. So they come in and they help us come up with ideas for CAPSA. They do service projects and things like that. So yeah. The youth
And
council.
you would provide resources, if there were a teen in need.
Yes, yes. Usually we would just refer them to a caseworker. The thing with that is oftentimes, like I've said, with minors, it gets a little bit tricky. But we will absolutely get them referred to a caseworker and help however we can, for sure.
Great, well, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for the work that you do.
Thanks so much. Does anybody else have any other questions? All
I
right,
have one last one.
sure.
With the influx that almost every city is seeing
Yeah.
of migrants and so forth, are we seeing anything from there that way?
Yeah, I have
An
seen,
initiative.
we have a caseworker who specifically works with our diverse populations.
Right.
And I have seen personally an uptick in refugees, immigrants, these types of communities. So, yeah, I would say so.
Okay, well, perfect. Well,
Well,
if nobody
thank you
has
all.
anything else,
Yeah,
thank you so much for coming and giving us of your
thanks,
time
thank you all.
for the message shared.
Do you have a place you want me to leave these?
Scarlett.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a
Have a
good
great
one.
night. All right. With that, we will move on. We have no legislative items at this time. And-
Michael, I just
Yep.
wanted to say thank you for inviting her. And I don't know if who puts input in the newsletter, but I think it might be a great little shout out if we could put that, like how to volunteer with CAPSA and that email address. I think that would be great.
That's a
Something
great
like that.
idea.
I don't, just a suggestion.
I can't take credit for inviting her.
Oh,
I'm not sure how that worked through the system.
We rotate them between planning
Council.
commission and council and kind of so that we get an even split. So you'll see them every so often.
So there's our man to thank. over there.
okay. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not really sure
all
how
the
it
staff. for that.
and zoning, but it's good. It's
Yeah.
good for public, you know.
Lots of
Yeah.
times if it's a public hearing, you
Yes,
get a lot more
that's what we need
people
to have.
drawn out
on.
Yeah,
on public hearings than sometimes council does, because
Right, yeah. Let's try to schedule those together.
maybe we could do an EMT presentation at one of the next controversial public hearings or something. Peace, that we might help each other that way. Anyway, okay, great comments. Thank you, everyone. No administrative actions to do, so we will move on to study items. And this is item number 2 on our agenda, accessory dwelling unit ordinance revisions. This is something that staff and everyone has been working on to make some ideas, to present some ideas and so forth. And so what I would think at this time, and what this is for, is we're going to review and discuss these revisions and so forth. And at the end of that, just to make sure, is it something that we would, after that, and we've discussed and talked and all of that, would we do something as to say, we would like to make it an agenda item? Or that we would review or present to the council or recommend to the council? Or
When you feel comfortable with
Yeah.
what we've got with the revisions.
right,
Well, even if you don't feel 100% comfortable, but when you feel like it's ready to present to the public,
right,
then you would hold a public hearing, because it is a land use ordinance, it's
Yeah.
changed to a land use ordinance. So we follow the public hearing, we'd follow the land use ordinance adoption procedure. And then you'd schedule a public hearing, you'd get their input on it, and then we could bring it back to the drawing board for revisions based on their input. You don't have to go to another public hearing after that if you
right.
don't want to, but you can. And then once you feel comfortable, after you've had the public hearing and you've got the revisions you feel comfortable with, that's when you make the recommendation and send it forward to city council for the final action. So
Perfect. Okay, all right. Would you like to give us a run through of the ordinance? Would you like to present some of those things, or do you want me to? I had a couple of points I was just gonna make, and I don't know,
go right
is
ahead.
that okay, just for a couple of minutes? Yes,
Point of personal privilege,
absolutely.
can you sort of give me anybody, a background on the development of the ordinance, and who it's gone to, how it's come about, just history, so. Because I'm coming in, I mean, I can see that this was adopted. The code was adopted in 1998, and this current version was adopted in 2019. But, you know, any history on it would be helpful too.
So Providence City used to have internal ADUs. We just called them accessory apartments, accessory dwelling units. And that's all that they had. And they had that until I want to say it was about 2005, I think. And then they felt like the development community was well, not necessarily development community, probably more the real estate community, was encouraging homeowners to purchase homes with internal dwelling units in them. And that rather than having single family neighborhoods, we would have a lot more duplex type neighborhoods than single family, even though we had the owner occupancy requirement. So they put a hold on accessory dwelling units. They removed them from the code. Anyone that had an existing one could continue to operate it. But so we still had the ordinance in place, so we could regulate those that were legal. And then, but we couldn't allow any new ones. And at that time, they were a conditional use. You had to come in and get a conditional use to get one. Just, I think a year, maybe 2 years at the very most, but I think it was a year, we decided to bring back, as part of the affordable or the moderate income housing program, we decided to bring back internal ADUs. And then either the following year or the year after is when the state code came, the state legislature met and mandated that you would allow ADUs. After we allowed the internal ADUs, and we actually didn't get very much negative feedback on that really with the public hearings and whatnot. So after we allowed the internal ADUs, we did have people talking to us about detached accessory dwelling units and small homes and whatnot. So actually John Drew did some research and took the time to craft, and he was mayor at the time, and present some ideas for the accessory dwelling unit. And that went through the process, or the detached accessory dwelling unit, and it went through the same process we're about to go through now, and held public hearings and whatnot. The one thing that people have always been concerned about was owner occupancy of one of the units. They didn't want to turn a single family home into a duplex where you have an absent investor that owns it and rents out both units. So they felt like owner occupancy has been a big deal. And so that's the direction we've gone. And right from the get-go with the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, we knew that was something that was a little bit unique and different. And so we wanted to make sure we were taking public input on it. We've had it in place for several years, and we haven't had a lot of takers. We've actually had quite a bit of interest, but people looking at their setup where they're existing, even if they have a big lot, depending on where their existing home is, sometimes they don't have room to work with an accessory dwelling unit. And so, we listened to those comments. As part of our moderate income housing plan, we, said that we would reach out to people and ask them for comments on ADUs, so we put some information on our land use page. And through the course of talking with people, talking with other cities, we had some feedback. So as part of our moderate income housing plan this year, we said that we would take the feedback that we had gathered the previous year and put those recommendations forward and see if we can make it a little easier. A couple of the things that are in this that we've had some confusion over is in the original one, if you had an accessory building and that accessory building was built legal, which is different setbacks than the ADU is, then you could come in and convert a portion of that accessory building to an ADU without having to change the setbacks, because the building was established prior to the ordinance. Then we started having people that wanted to build big detached buildings, and in one corner of those put an ADU. But when we talked with our attorneys, that really didn't meet the spirit, because new ADUs should be only 1,200 square feet total. And so if you're building a 3,000 square foot building, even though you might carve out 1,200 square feet specifically to an ADU, it was kind of gray area, whether that was complying with our ordinance or not. So our attorneys suggested that we not do that with new buildings. Being able to convert because people didn't know about the rules back when they built their buildings, that was different, they felt like. But with the new ones, they felt like maybe we should be more restrictive and have them stay at 1,200 square feet. But we have had people that have been willing to build those new bigger buildings to the regular setbacks for an ADU, and then want to convert, or not convert, but actually put a portion of that building as an ADU. And we haven't been able to do that. And that has caused some frustration. And when you look at some of the properties, it kind of makes sense to allow that. And then in other areas, it probably doesn't, but it would depend on the size and the location of the existing home and whatnot. The other thing that has been a stumbling block on a lot of our lots that are big, and full disclosure, I have one of those kind of lots. We have a 300-foot front yard and a 20-foot, well, it's longer than that, but goes straight down. So we have like 15 feet in the back before it drops over the hill. We would not be eligible to do an ADU, even though we could meet all of the regulations, because it can't go in front of the house, can't go in front of the primary dwelling. So someone that, and we have quite a few larger lots that the homes are set back further. And so they've got this big yard in front of them, and then they get to the point that they would like to do something, but they're limited because it has to be in the back. They've got plenty of area, total area, but they don't have enough area in the back. And so that's one of the other things that we got feedback from the public on. I did not give that feedback, but I do tell you my situation just for full disclosure. But we have had feedback from quite a few property owners that have their homes set way back and would like to do something, a smaller cottage or something on the front. The other thing we would try to explain to people is that these are accessory dwelling units. These are not supposed to be another great big home. We don't anticipate having two great big homes on a single lot. We are anticipating having a primary structure and then the accessory dwelling unit as an accessory dwelling unit. Several of the changes that snowballed from it when we, as Ryan and I were talking, we discussed the way the original ordinance read, it just said that the ADU had to follow the principal use setbacks. Well, we felt like sometimes that might be confusing to people, so we are recommending that we add an ADU portion in our setback, in our area regulation chart, so that ADUs can be treated a little bit differently from a primary structure if we feel like they should. The other feedback that we got from people, from neighbors, a lot of people didn't mind, and we get the same feedback about accessory buildings. This particular comment is directed as much to accessory buildings as it is to ADUs. They don't like the fact that someone can come in and put a great big building in the backyard, that can be as tall as 30 feet, 35 feet tall. And that's the comment that we got about, a few of the people that have come in and wanted to do ADUs. If it's just stayed relatively short, I mean, tall enough to be a feasible home, but not with fancy pitched roof and everything, nobody says much. But you start to get too much height, and then people seem to complain about, even though the square footage is the same, they don't like that extra height. So we put in the ordinance 30 feet, which is a 5-foot reduction, but you may want to think about that and see, maybe we want to say that they can't have they have to have a maximum on their pitch for the roof, so that they don't build a small unit with a great big roof. Because that does seem to be the detractor, is once it gets too high, people get uncomfortable. So anyway, does that answer your question, Joe, or is that too much or not enough? Or?
I really appreciate it.
Okay,
I do.
so that's how it all came about.
If you don't mind, let me, yeah.
I just have a couple of questions. So we're not talking about the accessory apartment units.
Not in this one.
This is just a separate building.
Yes.
And I think as you were making your explanation, I may have got confused, but an accessory building and accessory dwelling unit are different, even though if you put an accessory dwelling inside of an accessory building, then setbacks are
Well, that's
different, or
that's kind of what we need to
that's
talk
what
about.
we're trying
They
to
were
address.
originally, and the reason behind the thinking was people had built those buildings. And a lot of them actually didn't have much trouble to convert them into an accessory dwelling unit, because a lot of people had like their storage for their RVs or whatnot in part of the building. And then they would have the game room for the kids in the other part of the building. And a lot of those game rooms had restroom facilities and kitchenette type things. And so it wasn't a huge stretch to be able to convert some of those. In order to allow people the opportunity, because that building was built to zoning code with only 5 feet off the side and 5 feet off the rear, we allowed people to carve out a space of that building and utilize that as an accessory dwelling unit. Then we had people coming in wanting to build new buildings, big buildings, and do the same thing, only we couldn't let them because the ordinance says that ADU can only be a maximum of 1,200 square feet. And if was one thing to convert an old building that nobody knew was gonna have this new ordinance to be able to apply it there, the council felt like it was another thing to build a brand new big building with that intent. We've kind of gotten the feedback that the building's already there, and if it's working and if it meets the new setbacks, because some people actually did say, well, I'll put my building 15 feet off the backyard and 10 feet off the side yard. I'll make sure it meets the code. But our attorneys were not comfortable. The way our ordinance read, there was just too much gray and not enough. Yes, that's an okay way to do it. And so that's one of the proposals in here. I'm not saying that that's the way we should go, but we've had several requests. One of them's really quite serious about pursuing that. It feels like our current ordinance would allow it. But anyway, so we said we would put forward feedback we got from the public, and that's where it's coming from. But that's the difference, is that even under the new code, if somebody built a brand new building and you allowed them to put an ADU in it, this new code would require that new building to meet the ADU setbacks, not the accessory building setbacks.
One other question, a definition of ADU. If you have a building that has a bathroom and kitchen and sleeping arrangements or whatever, whether it's used for anything at all, if it's used for storage or not used, rented, is it only if you're gonna rent that out, or if you have it there for family gatherings, is that still an ADU? Or is it where is the definition or the dividing line between being able to utilize my home and it being an ADU?
Isn't it, if there's someone dwelling in it, it's an ADU, and if it's used as a reunion center, it's an accessory unit.
That's
accessory
kind of,
building.
if it's
Somebody's living there
natural,
all the time.
yes. And the other thing too is then the building code comes into play a little
Okay,
bit.
and stop you. When I make that statement, I'm not answering it. I'm asking a question.
Right.
Is my understanding correct?
I think that's how we would look at it, but the building code might have some input on it too, depending on so you've got a living unit, and then depending on what the other part of that building is, it may be that you had the three components that make a living unit: sleeping area, kitchen facilities, and bathroom facilities. It may be that you had those, but if it's not built to have it safely occupied as a full-time living unit, then they probably wouldn't be able to do that. But that would be a building code thing. So building code does come into play some when people are converting some of those big buildings and have a living unit in it. It's kind of like the live work units. They don't have to be built to a commercial standard, but sometimes the living unit has to have fire separation, a few things like that, depending on the building code and what the other part of the building is used for. So there would be some differences there.
Does that need to be defined in the ordinance at all?
We certainly could.
Well, because part of it is we're gonna look at some issues regarding accessory building units, as well as predominantly the discussion will be about accessory dwelling units. So we'll get into a little bit of that, but that would be a good way, a great comment, great idea, that as we go through and we listen and talk about it, to develop those definitions. Other municipalities are doing the same thing. I'll use Salt Lake City as an example. They are specifically identifying the definition for accessory dwelling unit, accessory building units, and even taking it a step further to identify approved typed ADUs based on what their building codes and things are, setbacks and everything else.
And again, you want to make sure that the definition in there includes something about owner occupancy,
Right.
because that's important to you. Now, there was a gentleman that presented at the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and to me, this would be a nightmare. We currently, when they do these, they are supposed to, along with both the interior accessory apartment units and a detached unit, they are supposed to file an affidavit that gets recorded against the property that says that one of the units must be owner occupied and they cannot be sold separately. We can see that we can make sure that happens with these. If it's a new build.
Yeah.
Or if it's a conversion of a building that's gonna require a building permit. The ones that we're struggling with, in all honesty, of even knowing how many we have for sure, are the internal ADUs. because a lot of times they don't really need a building permit to convert part of their home. And because of the way that the state code changed a little bit. And so we don't, even though people are supposed to file that affidavit, we're not seeing that happen. The biggest reason when I reach out to people is, well, what's that gonna do to my property taxes? I've checked into it, that'll increase my property taxes. And they don't, that's honestly, I don't think they're trying to be, I don't think they care that the city knows they have an ADU. I don't think that's the intent at all. They just don't want to see the increase in their property tax. And so they don't tell us about those internal ones. But we do have it in the ordinance that they should file an affidavit about the owner occupancy.
Keep in mind, in your mind, if you were in my spot and had to enforce the ordinance,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna go peeking in somebody's window to count the number of people in there. And I'm not gonna go in and check their ID to make sure that they're all related. There are some things that we can set in code, but do keep in mind, how are you going to think that that's actually going to be enforced? So just as a thought, when you start to look at these ordinances and codes, if there is no possible way to enforce, just keep that thought. And plus or minus in how you do it, it's just keep in mind how would you ever enforce, let's take for instance what you just said, if you set a law that one has to be, are you intending for that if something changes in the family situation and the owner moves out, then are you intending for both to be evicted? Are you intending for an eviction to occur? Just keep in mind how you think that enforcement can actually occur on some of these things. Now, when it's specific and we're building an ADU, and that's when you build it, we can enforce on the building side of the setbacks. But if you say, oh, well, this isn't a accessory dwelling unit, this is just a accessory unit that I build that might be able to house somebody someday. Well, in that instance, how will we know your intent was one thing, and now when we go to enforce it is now something different? You have now had somebody housing in it, that wasn't your intent when you build it, but when enforcement comes, intent may be gone, and now we're saying, hey, you don't have a family. Anyway, that would be my thought. Just in the back of your mind, as you change these ordinances, keep in mind how in the world that we enforce some of this stuff.
I think the majority, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Call in with the units, a nuisance, don't the neighbors call in and tell you?
so they do, and we reach out to the property owner, but some of that is on the honesty system. We've struggled with that for whether we allowed ADUs or not of any kind, just with the unrelated individuals in a home. And we've tried to look at it from having deputies look at the registrations of the cars that were parked there. Well, sometimes that doesn't always tell you, because if my brother came and had his car there, it would be registered to him and he would have a different last name than I would, and yet we're brother and sister, and it would be legal for him to be staying in the house because we're related. And so it's just very hard to prove unrelated. So those are things that we struggle with all the time on trying to, so our approach really has been to try and if people are honest about it, say, well, yeah, I've actually got 5 college students living in my home, then we say, well, yeah, okay, you need to tell one that they've got 60 days to find someplace else because you can only have 4 unrelateds. But if people are not open with us, then we try really hard and watch parking on the street and noise and things like that to make sure that it's not a nuisance, but that's really about the best we can do. What my point where I was going is that there are some professional planners that are encouraging that ADUs be allowed to be sold separately. To me, that would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Zoning compliance wise and everything, that would, because if your minimum lot size is 12,000 square feet, and your lot right now is 13,000 square feet, and then you put an ADU in it, and the ADU fits on 1,200, so everything is still cool. But if you take that ADU and you actually try and carve 2,000 square feet off, then all of a sudden you've got two non-compliant lots. So there's a lot to think about if we start carving up ADUs. So at this point in time, having the idea that when they build a new one, they have that affidavit that says it won't be sold separately is probably a good idea, because zoning wise, that would be very difficult.
Don't you have the same problem though? I mean, part of my job is to figure out how to work around your ordinance.
And you are pretty good at it.
What's going through my mind is, so I've got one of these and I go ahead and execute a 50-year lease on the accessory dwelling unit and commit in that lease that I give them 2,000 square feet. And that 2,000 square feet is essential to my other primary residence being qualified. Haven't I just circumvented your ordinance by a lease?
You may have, especially if you gave them an easement, because we allow that right now in order for lots to maintain their 12,000 square foot minimum and yet allow access to another area. They can maintain an easement, give that other area an easement. So yes, there are ways, and that comes back to Ryan's point on enforcing it. We do the very best we can do, but we can't check the county records every day to see who's moved what lot line and whatnot.
No,
So
and I don't expect to. We've got two houses in our neighborhood. The one that's on the corner of North Cherry and Center Street. That the Bostocks used to own way back when. I don't know who owns it now. But we've seen, I don't know if that's a monthly rental or an Airbnb or what, but the people aren't causing anything, the neighborhood that I know of. I don't know about the adjacent homeowners. Haven't talked to the Capeners next door to see what they think about it. But down the street, as you go down North Cherry at the very end of it, and I should know their names. But they put an Airbnb in their basement, but they are occupying it primarily. And, you know, the size of the unit is such, you notice the traffic and you wonder who's in the neighborhood, because nowadays you're sort of paranoid about people walking around, you know, but it hasn't really caused a problem. But let me just, and I don't mean to occupy, but I got a call to represent some people out in North Logan, and the North Logan, it was investors, an LLC, bought a very nice home out there, about 5,000 square feet, had a detached garage that basically had an apartment built on top of it. And the intent of it is to Airbnb the primary residence and have one of the investors in the LLC occupy an accessory dwelling unit that's above the detached garage. And the planning commission out there, the North Logan ordinance requires a public hearing on all conditional uses of an ADU out there. And they've got the community, a bunch of public clamor. And they denied the conditional use permit. And we appealed it to the Board of Appeals, and the Board of Appeals overruled and said it meets the definition. of it. And so, I noticed, I've read through your ordinance and you say it has to be occupied by a primary owner. Well, what about a business? Like that situation?
Well, even that primary owner is beginning to get a little tricky because state code changed so that multiple people can own a single residence. And so we do the best again, it comes back to, we do the best we can do to try and enforce what we can. The Airbnb thing, you're actually going to see that in the not too distant future, because we do have to clean our code up in order for us to be able to get people to get business license. We're not asking for a ton. We do ask for a conditional use, but we don't require public hearings. The only reason we want to have a conditional use for is we want to make sure that that the lot that they're going to utilize, they can have extra, they can house the cars or whatever it is they're gonna do. We're not trying to really stop it. We're just trying to make sure that it doesn't create a nuisance from the get-go. And that's the way the ordinance is right now, but we do need to tighten that up, and you'll see that in a few months. First of all, we'll get through this, and as we're getting through this, we'll also tackle the subdivision code, which I hope to have a draft to you for your next meeting. Be a very, well, not super rough, but pretty preliminary. You'll want to put a lot of work into it, but we have to have that new one in place by February 2024 on the subdivision. And it's kind of it's going to cause a lot of ripple effect. So it's a bigger impact to the code than what it kind of sounds like. We're doing a lot of it right now. So it's not going to really change a ton of stuff, but it just impacts a lot of different sections of the code to make sure it all refers to planning commission and administrative land use and nothing to city council. Planning commission only with preliminary plats and things like that. So anyway, but back to this. So that's where we're at with this code. And Joe, you bring up a lot of good points that we struggle with, whether it's a fence and a property line dispute, or it's too many dogs and we can't prove that they even have a dog, or, I mean, it's just, we struggle with code and we struggle with, but not just us, all communities struggle, because it's like Ryan says, it's very difficult to knock on the door and say, you need to prove to me who you are. So I think we need to really rely on our nuisance ordinances as strongly as, or more strongly than the occupancy.
You doing questions or?
Well, there's two things that I would like, if everybody's all right with it, is to let Scarlett sit back down for a minute,
I'm gonna
relax.
take notes.
I have a little bit of information I need to share as we get started. And then I think as we go through the code and we're looking at it, that some of those things will be, some answers will be given, and then we can ask more questions as well. So if that's okay, I think we kind of broke off from where we were going based on, let's have a good understanding of an ADU and a accessory building, an ABU, I guess, okay? So is everybody all right with that? Okay,
Yeah, I just have one other question. Is there a separate ordinance that covers accessory apartment units that are referred to as AAUs?
Yes,
Yeah.
there is.
Can we get that sent to us?
10-12.
10-12?
So by that, you would mean internal, correct?
Yes.
Where did you pick that up? Where did you pick that up?
China. Oh,
You're in the code. I'm on the draft of the
Oh,
report.
no, yeah, it's in the code.
Okay, thank you.
We're not dealing with it today, so, but I had questions about that too.
Well, they sort of have to dovetail. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wanted to read it so I could.
Exactly.
I agree, and I think also, wow, it's just so intertwined and interrelated that the accessory building units should also dovetail and should also be something that we're looking at, especially when we're talking about the size of buildings and whether or not they could be converted, and it almost seems like they should all kind of jive together.
I agree.
play well with each other.
Need to assume that they, at some point, they're gonna wanna make it into a partial dwelling unit.
Mhm.
Just assume that and then make your policies based on that.
And I really don't think any neighbor is okay with an accessory dwelling unit appearing larger or accessory unit, than the home.
Yeah, there's some strict, I think that's what we're trying to clarify, like, we had a situation where we have a homeowner that has 2 lots, he wants to put a barn on there. And originally from the subdivision, this was going to be a home lot. And you would think what you would see as you look at it would be the structure of a home. But now you see a red pitched barn, kind of thing like that, so it's a little bit different, so we have to look at. That's the part of the thing of the height issue more than anything else.
Well, and the building material and
Yeah.
looks similar to kind of thing.
That's a very good point. The other thing that I've thought about or considered is it kind of does depend on the zoning. Because when you're further out, you're not in a subdivision, not in a neighborhood, and you
Right.
have a large parcel, then maybe a barn is appropriate, but when it's a 1/4 acre in your backyard and it's taking up your whole yard or so, it doesn't fit, right? And so somehow I think we kind of need to account for balancing that.
Well, and that's where you have the issues of the 25% of your yard is the pad, is the envelope that you have. Then the height restrictions and
And
that
then
it cannot be taller than the existing home, the main structure, so.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just, if I can for a minute, couple of things. One is, with Brian Marble being absent tonight, excused from the meeting. Bob Washburn is a voting member. Should have recognized that at first, so. And then, because of my current situation, so I am a distributor for an accessory dwelling unit. I have built them over the past 3 to 5 years and we have are in support of it, and then we have built some and we've had them at fairs and things like that. And we have been working with the state representatives in several cities from up here in Cache Valley all the way to St. George and Salt Lake City and others over the last year to a year and a half on addressing the accessory dwelling unit aspect. We began approaching it because of a private 501c3 nonprofit where we as our family is working to get housing, transitional housing for veterans that need the help. That's how it started. And as we began that process, we were approached by several people. And at the fairs and things we're doing lately, the 3 biggest areas of desire came from individuals, number one, that had adult children with special needs, that their choice was they want their independence, but some of them need to be close so that they can help monitor them and keep them from getting taken advantage of. The second biggest group was in families that had parents that were starting to have some struggles or issues and still want their independence, don't necessarily want to go to a senior housing situation. And that was a big draw. The third has been for rentals. And that kind of goes 3 ways. One is just pure rentals to make some money with. The other is for seniors that have been in their home for a great deal of time, for probably 30, 40, 50 years. They own it outright, but they're living on Social Security and they could certainly use some additional income. So if they put something like that in, they could rent it out and have that additional income, or they could move into it, stay in their neighborhood and their community and their friends and everything and rent a larger house. That was one of it. And the other was, give me a minute, lost my chain of thought there. There was another aspect of it as well. Oh, for young new families starting. If they purchased a home and put this in the package, where they live, this young couple lives in the accessory dwelling unit and rents the big house out, that's a way for them to afford the mortgage. And as their needs grow, they could then move into the larger house and rent out the accessory dwelling unit to help pay for it. So I'm not, I'm going to participate in the discussion, but I'm not going to participate in the voting. I'm not going to recuse myself because that would be as if it was a negative vote. But I will step out, and I probably won't be here because of other commitments, but that will have Bob Hinkie participating as a voting member. And part of this comes, I'm
You're not gonna abstain.
not gonna abstain.
Abstain, but you are recusing yourself. You said you're not gonna recuse yourself.
If I recuse myself, it's a vote as no. Isn't that what we've talked about, Ryan?
That's what gives you the right, that's what gives Bob the right to vote, is if you recuse yourself. If you abstain, then that counts as neither a negative or a positive, but it
Okay.
doesn't allow Bob to vote.
Okay, but if I step out of the, if I leave the meeting or step out,
You can recuse yourself without stepping out of the meeting.
but does it allow him to vote?
Yeah,
It does?
Yeah.
Are we correct on that? Okay, because in past,
I think perception wise, you may step down from the diocese if it's something you are going to speak on as support from a public perspective
Yeah.
rather than a council perspective, stepping down. But simply abstaining from a vote stays your vote and says you still are a voting member, you're just not gonna vote on it.
so if I say I'm here as a voting member, but I'm not gonna vote, that doesn't allow,
That doesn't allow him
Yeah,
to
but-
present to make that.
yeah.
But you're not voting tonight.
Doesn't
Yeah.
vote to-
This
Well,
is
we
a
would only
closed
make a
session.
recommendation, yeah, so that's good. So,
Making a recommendation, we're just discussing.
We're gonna,
Yeah,
I mean, the
discuss
next
and-
step would be to have a
we would make it,
hearing, that we gotta, if we're gonna change anything, we gotta have it come back and see if we like it before we have a hearing, I think.
okay, so basically, we're just doing discussion tonight. And then the next step would be that. So let me just give you a little bit of information.
can I make just one point?
Sure,
We can hold a
Absolutely.
public hearing and then make changes to the ordinance
Definitely.
that we send to the city council. That's part of the purpose of the public hearing. We don't have to take a perfect product to the public hearing and stick with that and only that. The public hearing
Just to get
doesn't
more
bind
feedback.
us.
Yeah.
And if you understood that, I apologize, but I
No,
just
no.
wanted to make sure everybody understood what my understanding is. And if I'm wrong, then certainly staff can correct me.
It's really just collecting more information from the public,
Yeah.
right?
I think if it's a material changes after the public, you may choose to go back to get more feedback on material changes. If you've decided to go in a totally different direction, I mean, maybe technicality, you probably don't have to, but if you're going to go in one direction and then you totally 90-degree it, it might be a good idea, but
Yeah.
probably not as a requirement. If you're going to totally change,
From an ethical standpoint, I agree totally with you.
so,
But the one thing that concerns me is with both the AAUs and the ADUs is there's no parking requirement that's in there. And I actually want to talk to staff about that because I don't understand that one.
Either,
I thought there was a required
No.
parking space,
nope.
or at least 3 and something like that, but
No
if there isn't,
off-street
then.
parking requirement, so it says.
Okay,
That
Well, let
was
me
a,
just-
that was a conscious decision that the council that passed this made. That doesn't mean that that's the same decision that should be made now,
yeah,
but that was a conscious decision. Michael, one thing quick that I forgot to mention when I was talking. On, page 205 of the draft, under line 78, under 10.13.5, it says a maximum of 1 ADU shall be allowed on each property associated with a single family dwelling. And we have had this question come up. So that's very clear that you can only have one accessory dwelling unit, the detached accessory dwelling unit. We don't have anything in our internal ADU ordinance that says you can only have one or the other. So my question that you need to think about, and when we talk about dovetailing, can someone, how would you feel, and we have had this question come up, if someone had an internal accessory dwelling unit, they live in the house, but they have an internal accessory dwelling unit, they have a big enough lot that they can do an external. Would you allow an internal, an external, and a primary unit on one lot? You do need to think about that, because our code is not really clear on whether we could do that. We've hedged on the side, it's not spelled out that you can, so we're saying no, but, at this point, but we have had people ask that, if they could do an internal one and a detached one. So,
And to add to that, just to kind of devil's advocate side of that, keep in mind, if we have 4 unrelated party per unit, we've got quite a party. Once we have a traditional house with 4 unrelated, and then another ADU with 4 unrelated. And we've got 12 unrelated people on the property, and is that an issue? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but then again, how do you enforce? Are we gonna take blood checks or are we just gonna make sure? I mean, at some point, as you get into these things, you're right, I mean, is that okay? And if I have a big enough area, can I have a pool house? Can I have a basement apartment? Can I have a loft apartment? I mean, what, do you care? Maybe you don't care how many people live on it, because, you know, now have I actually converted a house into a compound or a multifamily housing unit? You know, there's houses in this town that are large enough, you could probably fit multiple families in it. I won't pick on any of you.
Well, and one of the things you said, Scarlett, it concerns me is the Utah Court of Appeals, which follows the 10th Circuit, has made it absolutely clear that in absence of an ordinance that prohibits it,
Yes.
zoning ordinances are in degradation of the property owner's rights to the property, and unless it's prohibited, it is allowed.
I think we have an ordinance, and I think you're right, that is the code, but I do believe in our ordinance, it will say if it's not allowed, then it's prohibited. I think there is
In
an
the use
ordinance
code.
that kind of goes, pulls that in and says if it's not specifically allowed, then it is unallowed.
As a general.
I
just
think it's a general statement, and I don't know how that would go
In
in the appeals, but I do know that when we came through and did the code codification, I think they asked specifically if they wanted something like that in it, didn't they? So anyway, I think there's some piece to that puzzle, but at this point, I think if we can clearly define what we want to see, then we'll have to take care of those pieces outside of that. But I don't know, I think if you can clarify, what in this do you like? What do you want to change? How do we get down to the nuts and bolts of this? We've covered, we still need to cover the 10,000 foot view, but keep in mind, we still got to get down to where the rubber meets the road on this.
So since we're on 10.13.5, because there's no clean way to attack this thing, and since we're there, you know, I would think that both 10.12 and 10.13 ought to be changed so that it says one or the other. And it's very clear that you have one or the other. If people want to have both,
Get it rezoned.
well, I don't know about rezone, but if it's a large enough lot, then to me, that should be a conditional use permit that people go for a conditional use permit if they want both, and the neighbors should know it. And all of the problems that encounter need to be addressed by terms in the conditional use permit.
But then we would need to set the conditions, which would be reviewed and then, evaluated in that. When we get to that point, then we need to codify what those conditions are that we could, so that we, because we can't just set anything, we have to set what's in the code.
I understand.
You know that, I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
the rest.
But I
Aware.
mean, I'm just giving you a general idea. This is a work session.
One of those conditions, if you were to lean towards allowing an ADU and an internal ADU and a primary dwelling, one of those conditions might be, at that point in time, additional parking kicks in. Rather than somebody coming in and saying, well, I got my ADU and I don't need any more parking, and I got my house and I don't need any more parking. But maybe if you do start leaning towards something more than just one or the other, one of the conditions would probably definitely be that you would want to talk about parking. Because I know a gentleman that presented at the league meetings, he minimized the amount of parking that goes on. It feels like many communities require too much parking. If you drive along Gateway Drive, Creekside Townhomes, Hidden Creek, and even this complex that I can't remember what Danny calls it, Homes on Parkway. They seem to be able to stay inside their boundaries. But some of our bigger complexes, they're parking all over the place. And so parking, we're not to the point that you can only have one space per unit in our little community.
Unless we eliminated all on-street parking, and then if they could still do it
Yes,
with the parking they have, that's one thing. But we just don't have wide enough roads to force them all out on the street, because if you don't have provided parking on the lot, there's just not enough room on our streets to
Especially in
allow.
winter.
What's that?
Especially in winter.
Anywhere, I mean, anytime.
What does that do? Because I remember on First East, until Randy Watts decided to make it illegal to park on the parking strips. But along First East, particularly between Second North and Fourth North, that they were using the parking strips as part of their off-street parking. And in a number of other neighborhoods up around Adams Elementary, but Randy put a stop to that because he wanted to reclaim those neighborhoods as single-family neighborhoods.
it's just things that, as long as we're talking and throwing out the ideas, I'm just popping them out there, but the parking, and one of you did bring up parking. Parking is, we actually haven't had too many people that have had the problems with parking with their ADU and their internal units that we know of. We have more problems with just single family homes, and then of course, the big complexes are struggling with parking, but we have a lot of problems with, it's going to be really interesting to see how a couple of our streets are the folks that live on them are gonna behave in the next couple of months, because there will be some street side parking changes that will be happening, and it will be a good test to see if people can really live within the parking regulations that we have right now.
Can we get some structure to how, like, we're gonna go through this document and like maybe just start from the top and go through it line by line, or what is the plan here so that we're not just kind of all over the place with random ideas?
Well, I
That's
think
the OCD member of the community.
I think he wants out by 7:30.
Yeah. I think if everybody's in agreement, we start with 10-13-1, the purpose and intent. To kind of go through that. Does that sound right?
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Because I've been all in favor of getting out of here by 7:32. What if we get a word portion of this sent to each one of us, and we each go through it prior to the next meeting and red line it, turn the track changes on and red line it with changes we each have and circulate it before the meeting. So we can just see what our thoughts are, and you can add comments onto the side. Because I've done that with this already with a number of mine.
I would just change circulate to submit. I think, why don't you take it, take the document, do your red lines, submit to Scarlett, and then she can either compile those together in one document, and then we can add that to the next agenda. I think circulating may inadvertently create a meeting outside of the meeting. And so, anyway, that would be my only,
Well, you can combine that with Word pretty
So-
easily too.
but anyway, I think
Are
if
you
you
gonna
submitted
use
that,
like a shared Google Doc?
yes, that would potentially create a meeting outside of the meeting that you're then potentially making. Anyway, I think that you would want to submit those in, but similarly, we did that kind of a thing with the minutes today. You all took, you reviewed, you had your modifications, and they were quick. And that quickly changed and corrected minutes, and I think we could simply do that with the same ordinance. I like Joe's comment, because then you're out and you get to read it and make a few modifications and then go from there.
Does that sound good to everyone?
It sounds good to me. Maybe, can we ask for each individual if there's a key? I know I have one key area that I have a question about, that I'd like to, that would be part of my feedback. Would like to just throw it out there to see if it's like, hey, we thought about this and we can't do it, and if everyone has a bugaboo that they'd like to get out there.
You want to do that now?
I could, yeah,
A
just,
bugaboo.
yeah.
A bugaboo?
The one I was thinking of is just, was it considered, or could it be considered to, like, as these changes are being made, completely disallow ADUs in the R16 and potentially the R18 zones? Because it just doesn't make any sense at all for me I'm trying to think of my lot, which is a 6,000 square foot lot. Like, how the heck would that happen? And I can't think of any way that would be clean. So I just wanted to ask, is that something that intentionally you said we have to allow it in all the zones?
Not all, we don't have to, by state code, we don't have to allow it in all zones. Maybe you would want to say, because you have to remember, that's a minimum lot size. So even though you have an R16 zone, you may have several, depending on the development, you may have several 10 or 12,000 square foot lots in that zone.
That's right.
So maybe you would want to say, tie it to actual lot size. Any lot under 8,000 square feet or 10 or whatever you decide would be ineligible for an detached accessory dwelling unit.
Because you have a maximum size of a ADU. so
Yeah.
You could then say, that
Just do the math.
it needs to have, if our minimum is 6,000 square foot lot, to have 2 units on the same, maybe that's 12,000 square feet that you need, because now you have 2 units on a same one. But if it is an R16 zone that has a 12,000 square foot lot, well, then maybe that's doable in that zoning, but maybe you get something like that. So we're kind of thinking,
Yeah.
On the other side of that coin, it might be, and I don't know, it's just so hard to think of all of the different scenarios, right? And there's always an outlier or always a different exception. But if we're looking at the larger lot sizes, an acre and a state lot, even larger, could they potentially have 2 small ADUs? Right? It's gonna fit, they have plenty of space, they have parking. Just something.
Is that where you
kind of
mentioned,
consider, right?
is that where you, I didn't, is that where you mentioned something more than one, that they come to get a conditional use, which would then require a public hearing?
But not a public hearing, but a public meeting
Public, okay,
to, the notice be given to the neighbors
and so forth.
of the.
So something like that, if they have the space and could do it and are asking for it, that something like that triggers where the neighbors are contacted, it can also come and participate. I like the idea. The only thing I would ask is if, when you combine everybody's information, I like yours red line that you did. If you can make it a different color, that would help me.
I've done that.
We all get a different color.
I have done that before.
I don't know that we need that because, well, anyway, that's up
I
to
think
you
there's
guys.
enough colors in the color wheel. I think you can all have your own color.
I have done that for councils and commissions before, so that's
Okay.
not unreasonable, no.
Does anybody want to bring up a key bullet point? That's
Well,
something issue to them.
I think the definition of when something becomes an ADU is important. And I also think that it's really is important that we do the 10, 12 accessory apartment units, so that we're addressing the commonalities that everything would, if we're gonna change something, it should change both, I think.
Well, address all three of them. I think, they clarify at least specifically the definitions of accessory building unit, what can and can't be. If the code doesn't already describe that, same with the apartment unit, internal apartment unit and the accessory dwelling unit. Joe, is there anything specific that stands out for you or would be something to?
No,
All
I
of
can,
us to
I can
think
leave the
about.
comments. I wouldn't mind having the definition sections just, in word form, because, I went back and was trying to make sure the definition sections were tied into the same definition of the ordinance.
Because the definition section is, some of that is code wise and it's one single, that's like giving you a dictionary. Because one code section covers almost all definitions now, and so definitions aren't always, or most definitions aren't specific for a chapter. They're code wide, and so that's like that you're asking to give you a dictionary. So if you give us,
I hear what you're saying, but I'm not understanding, because isn't there just a separate definition sections for the zoning regulations?
No,
no,
Where is the definition sections then?
it's in Title I, but it's Title I.
I mean, we could
Section
pick
3, I
out
think.
certain ones that we thought you were most interested in, but just keep in mind, if you want a specific one, then we may need to pull that.
But I can email the definition section to you as well. I can email the definition, out of Title I. I can email the, chapter 12, the 10-12 and
Yeah.
10-13.
I think that would be good as we are reviewing everything in great detail. To be able to have that right there for these three main issues. And as we go through the codes for each of those are things that we would look at. Bob, how about you? Is there anything that you would stand out to you?
No, I think everything you're bringing up is good. I did notice, Scarlett, you mentioned on the 10-13-10, a mobile home. And I know there's a difference between a mobile home and a prefab home.
Mhm.
So I guess that's referring to a mobile home, which are older. They don't have mobile homes anymore, I don't think, do they?
They do, they call them manufactured homes. But
That's what I'm wondering, what do we,
yeah,
If you put it on a foundation, does that make it not a mobile home?
you surrender the title and it becomes real property.
So yes, to answer that, but generally you'd have to take off the axle
Right,
Yeah.
and deconstruct the,
They actually have you, what they do now is they require you take the frame off. It sits on the foundation, the frame comes off, and then it's actually tied directly to. You still have piers and things that it sets there on the foundation because it's up inside, and they have you weld that or attach it through straps or plates.
They don't want you to drive away.
Well,
you've got to convert it into a.
Fixed structure.
Yeah.
and maybe, because you said, as defined by Utah code, maybe that's explained there. I don't know. But anyway,
it is, because even you could still take them with the frame and put it on, take the axles and stuff off. Tack the frame to the stand, that the stand is now sitting on a footing itself and it rebar welds over to that, so it's all tacked,
right.
so.
But
Yeah,
I don't have anything in particular. I think what everybody's talked about is good.
Shelley?
Yeah, I appreciate this work, Scarlett. Thank you so much. I am wondering about the codification process. Is this similar to what they did? Did they go through and they make sure that it aligns with state code? Have there been changes made during that process? Are those included in this?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
They're part of the black, because they were made at a different time, so they're part of the existing code.
Okay,
But if the state met again in the legislature, they may change it, so.
Yeah.
Well, then the last thing I want to do is why this is important to me. I want to just share with you, when we were at the League of Cities and Town, the conference, we were asked about, we were asked about affordability and what could be done. And that they said in Salt Lake, there has to be some area where there are homes that are pretty inexpensive and affordable. We looked today and it's around the State Fair Parks. There's a home that was built in 1920. It is 804 square feet. It sits on a lot of 1,700 square feet. It is the least expensive thing that's up for sale, and it is for $300,000. And all the cities are struggling with some of the same things. Not well, what we're struggling with here is the affordability thing. And I pulled these numbers today. Actually, everybody knows my son is smarter than me. He's the one that actually. I asked him what is available. There are 14 townhouses for sale in Providence with an average price of $391,555.
Say it again, please. I'm a little bit slow.
That's okay. 14 townhouses at an average price of $391,555.
Thank you.
There are 2 condos for sale with an average price of $303,500. And there are 35 houses for sale for all those new young married couples wanting to live in Providence with an average price of $737,527. I asked him to look at rentals. There are 7 rental units in Providence, 5 condos, 1 townhouse, and 1 house. And the average of those monthly rental payments is $1,699. So to be able to, in my opinion, create some affordable units that could be rented or can service parents and families with special needs, the ADU is a very good option. And so we've moved forward with it based on existing code, and we have a permit issued here in Providence, and we have a unit that's coming, and we will move forward that way. But the biggest thing about it is I complimented Scarlett because I think a lot of the things she addressed that will keep things from an RV just coming and being parked on a slab, or a makeshift unit itself, one of these larger sheds put on there and then look to add plumbing to it or things. All those things. It needs to be on a foundation, because if it's just a slab, you're going to have frost level issues, and then that's going to cause a lot of problems. Is just one of my opinions. The other is the requirement that she's looking at, that it must match the facade of the existing home. That way we don't have a lot of just boxes or things like that, odd shape or odd design, that it matches the facade and colors. I think that will complement the community more than distract from it. So those were 2 big things.
Building materials as well.
Yeah, the building materials, it's the materials that are used, and absolutely. And the required off-street parking, they have to, I thought the old code said that we had to provide a parking space for it. That's why it was, in a couple of cases, we poured a 3rd pad or things like that. So I think what Scarlett has put together, what came out of the conferences and things, some of them were very crazy. The guy that said we should eliminate the requirement for owner occupied and just turn people loose. I was sitting there with about 3 mayors from different municipalities, and I said, you guys better get upstairs to this conference, because that's what he's promoting to do. And I think that's a failure, partly because you would think if I lived at the house and I had this unit in the back that I was renting, I'm gonna make sure my yard, my home, and that ADU looks good, I would think. I think that's a big part of it, that you don't just create this cluster of rental properties. That you have somebody who's technically responsible, and I think it says that their names need to be on the deed or documents or something like that. So those were things that other communities and other cities were looking at and addressing very much. So anyway, those are the things. The reasoning for it is there's no way our kids can come here and go to school and live in Providence. You know, I think that's a big part of it. I think seniors can't move here and afford to rent something if they live on Social Security. So anyway, those were just my thoughts. So I appreciate everyone being here, and I appreciate the excitement and enthusiasm. I'm a little concerned about Shelley because I remember one of her first meetings, she said, don't you think we should just go through all the code and look at it and revise it? And I think this will be a task in itself. So, but
By the
thank
time
you.
we get done with
Yeah.
what we've got to go through for the next 6 months, you
Yeah.
will feel like you've gone through the whole code.
Yeah. But thank you all very much. If nobody has any other comments, information that should be presented, does anyone have anything that needs to be brought up?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
There you go. I have a motion to adjourn by Joe Chambers. Can I have a second?
Second.
Got a second from Bob Washburn. All in